Imagine spending your entire life taking care of your family and suddenly discovering that those you loved the most were plotting something dark against you. Your own children, driven by greed, were scheming a coup over the $100 million inheritance that George and Mary had saved with so much love and sacrifice. Have you ever stopped to think, how far would you go to protect your dignity and your life? This is not just the story of a midnight escape. It's the story of how true love between two elderly people managed to overcome greed, betrayal, and even abandonment. Before we dive into this inspiring story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these gripping tales. George and Mary believed they had built a close-knit family, only to discover, too late, that the human heart can be corrupted by the desire for wealth. And it is precisely in this clash with reality that a journey of courage, hope, and transformation begins. Get ready. This story will move you, teach you, and inspire you.
George, at 75, was the kind of man who seemed to carry in his eyes all the stories of a lifetime of work and sacrifice. The son of a humble carpenter, he began working as a teenager to help support his family. He never knew luxury in his youth, but he discovered something far more valuable: discipline, honesty, and the courage to build his own path. His greatest achievement, however, was not the construction company he founded, which years later grew and prospered. It was Mary. She, at 72, a primary school teacher, had a heart that seemed to know no boundaries. Patient, loving, and firm when necessary, she was the soul of the family. While George built buildings and houses, Mary built values within their children: respect, gratitude, loyalty. Life seemed to smile upon them. Over the decades, the couple turned small bricks of effort into a true empire, not of ostentation, but of security. Their successful business, combined with smart investments, amassed a fortune of $100 million. But for George and Mary, money was just a tool. They never lived extravagantly. They remained in the same comfortable mansion, without excess, surrounded by memories, books, family photos, and furniture that carried history. What they valued most were family Sundays. Every week, children and grandchildren gathered around Mary's abundant table. There were laughs, stories told, children running around the yard. George loved to sit on the living room sofa, watching the scene with a proud smile. Many times he thought it was all worth it. Their children, Richard, Susan, and David, were already adults, each with their own challenges. Richard, the eldest, had followed in his father's footsteps in business, but with an ambition that was a bit excessive. Susan, delicate and charismatic, faced turbulence in her marriage and believed that money could solve her problems. David, the youngest, was a dreamer, but financially unstable, always asking his parents for help. Despite these weaknesses, George and Mary believed that love would always be the strongest bond. They often talked about it during quiet nights on the porch, he gazing at the stars, she calmly crocheting. "You know, Mary," George would say, "when we're gone, I want them to know it wasn't money that made us happy, but what we built together." "I think the same," she replied with a smile. "I want them to remember our laughter, not our bank accounts." They had faith that when the time for inheritance came, there would be no conflicts. Everything would be divided equally, without resentment, without disputes. After all, they believed they had raised their children with the best values. At that moment,
George and Mary could never have imagined that behind the friendly conversations and Sunday embraces, something dark was silently growing within the hearts of their own children. And that something, sooner than they expected, would surface in a cruel way. And now, the story is about to astonish you, because what they heard that night was far more sinister than you can imagine. The night was calm. The clock was nearing midnight when George got up to get a glass of water. Mary, asleep beside him, remained in her usual light slumber. He walked slowly down the mansion's hallway, feeling the chill of the floor beneath his feet. When he reached the kitchen, he noticed a faint light coming from the adjoining room. Strange. Everyone should have been asleep. He approached quietly, curious. That's when he heard muffled voices. At first, he thought it was the television left on, but as he listened more closely, his heart froze. They were his children's voices. Richard spoke firmly, almost impatient. Susan and David answered, each with their own unease. George hid near the door, trying not to make a sound. His heart pounded so hard it seemed everyone could hear it. He knew he had to call Mary. Rushing back, he gently touched her shoulder and whispered, "Wake up, darling. Come with me, but don't make a sound." Still drowsy, Mary followed him. As they reached the door, they clearly heard the conversation that would change everything. Richard, the eldest, spoke coldly. "They've lived long enough. That inheritance needs to be ours now. Waiting could cost us dearly." Susan, in a bitter tone, added, "Exactly. I can't take it anymore. I'm drowning in debt, and they're just sitting on 100 million as if it were a game. It's unfair." David, the youngest, sounded hesitant, but still said, "If they don't hand it over willingly, we'll have to force it. I'll do whatever it takes." The words pierced George and Mary like knives through their chests. Mary brought her hand to her mouth to stifle a cry. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. George, though trying to remain calm, felt a crushing weight in his chest. How was this possible? These were the children they had given everything for. Sacrificed dreams, nights of rest, trips they never took. Also, their children would never lack a thing. Mary whispered, tears streaming down her face, "George, they want to destroy us." He held her tightly, fighting back his own despair. "Shh, we need to think. They mustn't know we heard them." The two retreated silently, returning to their bedroom. The weight of betrayal made it even hard to breathe. They sat on the bed, in shock. It was as if their entire life devoted to family had turned to dust. In that moment, it was no longer about money. It was about survival. Greed had blinded their own children to the point of plotting something terrible. George and Mary understood. If they stayed in that house, they were in danger. They spent hours awake in silence, listening to the wind against the window. The hardest decision of their lives was made that night. They would not wait to see what their children would do. With his heart in pieces, George looked at Mary and said, "At midnight, we leave this place. We have no other choice." And that night, a lifelong love was put to the test by the most painful betrayal of all, that of their own children. You think this is already shocking? Just wait until you discover what they decided to do in silence while everyone else slept.
Just before the clock struck midnight, George and Mary were ready. With trembling hands, Mary placed a few clothes into a small suitcase. George, with a resolute expression, set aside important documents and an envelope of cash he had kept hidden for emergencies. They took no jewelry, no keepsakes, nothing that might draw attention. The heaviest burden was already inside them, their broken hearts. They carefully opened the back door, fearing that even the slightest creak might betray them. The garden, lit only by the faint glow of the moon, seemed like a silent stage for their farewell. Mary took a deep breath, holding George's hand, and together they walked toward the old car he kept in the garage. On the deserted road, silence reigned. Neither had the strength to speak. Tears fell, but not only from sorrow, also from disbelief. How could a lifetime of love be repaid with such treachery? They drove for hours until they reached a small town in the countryside. There they rented a modest little house. The contrast with their mansion was immense, yet strangely, they felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, they were free from the shadow of greed. Mary found a new reason to rise each morning. She began teaching as a volunteer in a community school. The children, many of them poor, looked at her with affection and gratitude. That made her feel that, despite everything, she could still plant seeds of kindness. George, in turn, offered his experience in construction to help local small business owners. He repaired roofs, fixed walls, built fences. Often he was paid in bread, fruit, or simply with smiles, but for him, that was enough. Little by little, the pain of betrayal began to be replaced by the peace of a simple life. They looked into each other's eyes, and even with the scars of disappointment, they knew they still had one another. And in that simplicity, they discovered a new kind of wealth, the wealth of genuine relationships, of solidarity, and of empathy. But destiny still had a surprising twist in store. Did you think their escape had solved everything? Then get ready, because the most astonishing part was yet to come.
One day, George was invited to help with the renovation of an old, abandoned building. The place was going to be transformed into a community center to shelter at-risk youth. When he arrived, he found dozens of dedicated volunteers, each offering the best of what they had. The energy of that place touched him deeply. George remembered how hard he had fought to build his own life. In the eyes of those young people, he saw the same need for support that he and Mary had once felt. With discreet tears, he said to Mary that night, "My dear, I think we've found the true purpose of what we have. This money should not be a source of discord, but of transformation." Mary smiled in agreement. "If our children chose greed, then let us choose kindness. Let this money do the good they failed to see." From then on, they began allocating part of their fortune to social projects. Schools were renovated, underprivileged families received help, and young people gained access to education. Each gesture seemed to heal a piece of the wound left by their children. Meanwhile, on the other side, Richard, Susan, and David were tearing each other apart in fights. Each wanted to control what they believed was their right. The money they expected never came. Greed, like a weed, corroded their relationships and their very lives. Their parents' absence revealed how much they had lost, not only financially, but emotionally. They discovered that the real treasure had already slipped through their hands. George and Mary's love and trust. And in that contrast between good and evil, destiny revealed its silent justice. And if you think you already understand this story, you're mistaken. The next step in this family's journey will turn everything upside down.
Years passed. George and Mary became pillars of the community. They were known as the grandparents of the heart because they welcomed everyone with generosity. The community center thrived, schools were expanded, and families were rescued from poverty. Mary, now with completely white hair, felt proud of every child who learned to read thanks to her lessons. George, though slower, was still moved whenever he saw young people graduate with the help he had provided. Meanwhile, their children remained engulfed in problems. Richard lost businesses due to impulsive decisions. Susan saw her marriage collapse and withdrew into isolation. David, deep in debt, nearly lost everything to reckless gambling. What they had once believed to be the solution to their lives had become the root of their failures. One day, Richard managed to track down his parents. He went to see them, expecting bitterness, but what he found was surprising. Two serene, smiling elderly people, surrounded by those who truly loved them. Richard wept as he realized that greed had stolen his chance to experience that love. His parents did not deny him forgiveness, but neither did they turn back. The inheritance now belonged to those who truly needed it. George, with firmness, said only, "Son, life teaches us that money can divide, but kindness multiplies. You chose the harder path. There is still time to change, but the decision is yours." And so, without resentment, but with determination, George and Mary showed that the greatest response to evil is to live with dignity and purpose. The story of George and Mary is a powerful reminder. True wealth is not found in bank accounts, but in the values we cultivate and share. They could have fallen into sadness or resentment, but instead they chose life, peace, and kindness. Their children learned, too late, that greed only leads to ruin. George and Mary, on the other hand, proved that when you live with faith, kindness, and courage, life always opens new paths. Never underestimate the power of believing in yourself. The kindness you spread today may return multiplied tomorrow. And you, if you were in George and Mary's place, would you have the courage to leave everything behind to protect your peace? Write your reflection in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this story touched your heart, don't miss the next inspiring journey already appearing on your screen. Click now to watch.